For 28 years, the heart of Sterling and Gray Architects beat in rhythm with the steady click of Margaret Albright's keyboard. She was a keeper of secrets, the solver of crises, the warm, constant presence who remembered every birthday and every coffee order. Everyone thought she was untouchable, a fixture. But sometimes, even the most cherished fixtures are replaced for something newer, shinier, and cheaper. The end of an era. The heart of Sterling and Gray Architects had beat for 28 years to the steady, reliable rhythm of Margaret Albright's fingers dancing across her keyboard. It was a sound so constant, so woven into the very fabric of the office's daily life, that most never consciously heard it. They simply felt its absence on the rare days she was out sick, leaving behind a silence that felt unsettling and profound. Margaret was more than an employee. She was the institution's quiet conductor, the keeper of its secrets, and the warm, grounding presence who remembered every birthday, every allergy, and every coffee order, double-shot, non-fat latte for Mr. Sterling, black with 2 sugars from the mailroom's Pete. Everyone, from the senior partners to the summer interns, believed she was untouchable, a fixture as permanent as the marble reception desk she presided over. But in the modern corporate world, even the most cherished fixtures are sometimes deemed outdated, replaced by something newer, shinier, and far more cost-effective. On this Tuesday morning, the soft click-clack of her keyboard was a gentle melody accompanying the sun streaming through the high windows of the open-plan office. Margaret, at 62, was a portrait of elegant efficiency. Her silver bob was perfectly styled, her cream-colored blouse impeccably pressed. She hummed a faint, tuneless melody as she meticulously organized the final invoices for the quarter, her movements precise and practiced. Her desk was a testament to her long tenure, a miniature museum of the firm's history. Framed photographs of her late husband, Arthur, and their grown son stood beside celebratory snapshots of company picnics and project completion parties. A thriving orchid, a gift from a grateful client, bloomed defiantly under the glow of her desk lamp. Her world was one of quiet order, a universe she maintained with calm competence. She knew where every single paperclip was, the exact wording of every client contract from the last decade, and the unspoken tensions between the partners that never made it to the meeting minutes. She was a human glue that held the polished facade of Sterling and Gray together. The sharp sound of a door opening cut through the office's gentle hum. The door to the main partner's office, a heavy, sleek slab of frosted glass engraved with the company logo, swung inward. Brendan Sterling, the CEO, emerged. In his 50s, Brendan was usually the picture of relaxed confidence, a man who wore his success as easily as his tailored suits. Today, however, his shoulders were set in a stiff line, and his eyes, usually crinkled with a charming smile, darted around the room, avoiding any direct contact. He was not alone. Following a step behind him was Chloe, the new MBA hire everyone had been whispering about for weeks. At 27, Chloe was a vision of sharp, modern ambition, dressed in a fashion-forward pantsuit that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Her expression was neutral, but her gaze as she swept across the office was one of cool assessment, not curiosity. Margaret. Brendan's voice was unnaturally tight. A thin veneer of politeness stretched over clear discomfort. Could we see you in the conference room for a moment? Bring a notepad. A cold, sharp trickle of unease, entirely foreign to her usual composed demeanor, traced a path down Margaret's spine. It wasn't the request itself. It was the totality of the picture they presented. Brendan's avoidance of her eyes. Chloe's presence, which felt less like an observation and more like an inspection. The specific instruction to bring a notepad, a tool for an employee, not a participant. The conference room, which was reserved for client presentations or serious internal discussions. She felt the eyes of the office on her, a dozen subtle glances quickly averted as she calmly stood, smoothing her skirt. She picked up her leather-bound notepad and her favorite pen, a heavy, elegant gift from Arthur for her 20th anniversary with the firm. Her heart had begun a slow, heavy thud against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread that contrasted violently with her outwardly placid expression. The walk to the conference room felt miles long. The air grew colder with each step. Brendan held the door open for her, and she entered the silent, sterile space. The large glass table reflected the flat, gray sky outside, making the room feel expansive and empty. Seated at the table was Susan, the HR manager, her face a carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy that did nothing to hide her own discomfort. "Please, Margaret, have a seat," Brendan said, gesturing to a chair that faced the two of them, with Susan as a silent witness on the flank. It felt like an interrogation setup. Margaret sat, placing her notepad on the table. She folded her hands on top of it, waiting. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her squirm. Brendan cleared his throat, clasping his own hands on the table in a mirror of her posture. "Margaret," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a rehearsed speech. "First, I want to say that your dedication and service to this firm over the past 28 years has been truly exemplary." The dreaded preamble. The "but" hung in the air between them, palpable and suffocating. Margaret's focus narrowed, her world shrinking to the grain of the wooden table. She spotted a tiny, almost invisible crack near the edge, a flaw she had never noticed in all her years of arranging coffee and pastries for meetings in this very room. "The industry, the world really, is changing at a rapid pace," he continued, the words sounding hollow and borrowed. "We're moving toward a more integrated, digitally forward operational model. It's about streamlining efficiency and leveraging new technologies to stay competitive. It's a painful but necessary shift for the future of Sterling and Gray." He glanced at Susan, who gave him a tiny, encouraging nod. He slid a single sheet of paper across the glossy surface of the table. The words "severance agreement" were printed in a bold, unforgiving font that seemed to scream up at her. "It is with sincere regret that we must inform you that your position is being made redundant," Susan said, her voice soft but dispassionately clinical, as if she were reading from a manual. "We're offering a standard severance package. 6 weeks' pay, plus an extension of your health benefits for 2 months. This is contingent on you signing this agreement today." The word landed like a physical blow. Redundant. After 28 years of being the essential, indispensable core of the office's daily life, she was redundant, like an outdated piece of software, an obsolete machine, a thing to be phased out. "Chloe will be taking over a consolidated, streamlined administrative role," Brendan added, as if this information might somehow soften the devastating finality of the previous sentence. Margaret's world tilted on its axis. The framed awards on the wall, for projects she had helped manage from messy inception to triumphant completion, seemed to mock her. She could see the future unfolding in a horrifyingly clear flash. Chloe, sitting at her desk, throwing her family photos into a cardboard box. The whispered, pitying conversations by the water cooler. The empty, terrifying silence of a weekday morning with nowhere to go, no purpose to fulfill. A hot pressure built behind her eyes, but she willed it back. She would not let them see her cry. Not here. Not now. Her professionalism, the armor she had polished for nearly 3 decades, was her final shield. She took a slow, steadying breath, drawing on a well of strength she didn't know she still possessed. "I see," she said, her voice miraculously steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening within. She looked at the document, then at the pen Brendan had placed beside it. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint. She ignored it. Instead, she picked up her own pen, the heavy, elegant one from Arthur. It felt like a final act of defiance, a reclaiming of a small piece of dignity. She flipped to the signature page. The line was blank, waiting. She uncapped her pen. The room was so silent she could hear her own blood rushing in her ears. She signed her name, Margaret Albright, for the last time on a Sterling and Gray document. The signature was neat, unwavering, a perfect forgery of composure. She recapped the pen, set it down, and slid the signed agreement back across the table. She stood, her back straight, her head high. "I'll clear my desk," she said, her tone even and final. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving them sitting in the silence of their own decision. She returned to her desk, the eyes of the entire office upon her, and began, with methodical calm, to place her personal belongings into a single cardboard box. Each item was a piece of her history. She did not cry. She did not look at anyone. When the box was full, she picked it up, turned, and walked out to the main doors of Sterling and Gray for the very last time, stepping out of her old life and into a terrifying unknown void. They watched her go, believing the story of Margaret Albright was over. They could not have been more wrong. This response is AI-generated. For reference only, the blueprint of a dream. The silence in her home on that first Monday morning was a physical presence, heavy and oppressive. It was a stark contrast to the familiar symphony of her former life. The hum of the office printers, the gentle ring of telephones, the murmur of colleagues, the rhythmic click of her own keyboard. Here, there was only the dull ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a solemn echo marking the passage of a life that had, for all intents and purposes, been deemed finished. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that was slowly going cold. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene, but to Margaret, it felt like a portrait of obsolescence. The cardboard box from her office sat on the table, like an uninvited guest, a tombstone for a 28-year career. A wave of despair threatened to pull her under. The financial worries were a constant, gnawing anxiety at the back of her mind. The severance would not last long. But more potent than the fear of bills was the crushing blow to her identity. Who was Margaret Albright if not the organized, capable, indispensable secretary of Sterling and Gray? Her gaze fell upon the box. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, she pulled it toward her. It was time to face the ghosts. She began to remove items, not as an act of mourning, but of archaeological excavation, sifting to the layers of her own history. There was a framed photograph of her late husband, Arthur, his kind eyes seeming to look directly at her. "You're the strongest person I know, Maggie," he'd always say, squeezing her hand. The memory was a lifeline. There was a faded, crayon-drawn card from the son of a partner, given to her 20 years ago for helping him with a school project. There was a post-it note, yellow with age, from a terrified intern named Leah, scribbled a heartfelt, "Thank you for saving me today, Margaret. I'd be lost without you." And then, her fingers brushed against a small, elegant stack of business cards tucked away in a corner of the box. She pulled them out. They were a personal project from a decade ago, a dream she had quietly nurtured and then, out of fear and practicality, shelved indefinitely. The card was printed on heavy, pearlized stock. The script was clean and professional, yet had a subtle, welcoming flair. It read, "Albright Assistants, precision with a personal touch." She held the card, running her thumb over the raised lettering. Redundant. The word echoed in her mind, but now it sparked something different. It wasn't she who was redundant. It was the cold, impersonal, efficiency at all costs model they were moving toward. Her skills weren't obsolete. Her kindness wasn't outdated. The corporate world had simply forgotten its value. Sterling and Gray had traded a seasoned strategist for a simple button pusher. A new thought, fragile yet electrifying, began to form. What if her value wasn't tied to a single company? What if the very thing they had discarded was exactly what other people desperately needed? The spark ignited into a flame of purpose. She wasn't going to look for another job. She was going to build one. She opened her laptop, its screen glowing with possibility. The quiet click of her keyboard now sounded different. It was no longer the sound of fulfilling someone else's agenda. It was the sound of building her own. She spent the next 2 days in a state of focused frenzy. She built a sleek, professional website using the insider knowledge she'd accumulated over a lifetime. She knew exactly the pain points of small businesses and overwhelmed executives. She offered more than just administrative support. She offered crisis management, sensitive client communication, and the kind of institutional memory that couldn't be downloaded. She emphasized the human touch, the discretion, the calm competence that no algorithm could replicate. Her first client found her through a local business forum. Leo, a 35-year-old entrepreneur, was on the verge of collapse. His startup, a promising eco-friendly packaging company, was drowning in its own disorganization. "I'm a designer, not an accountant," he confessed on the phone, his voice strained with panic. "My inbox is a nightmare. I probably missed crucial invoices, and I'm pretty sure I double-booked myself with investors and a fabric supplier. I'm drowning." Margaret listened, asked a few precise questions, and felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was her element. "Leo," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "Take a deep breath. Email me your login credentials. Let me take a look, and I'll call you back in 2 hours with a plan." For the next 72 hours, Margaret worked with a focus she hadn't felt in years. She dove into the chaotic digital ocean of Leo's business. She created a color-coded filing system for his emails, reconciled his books, unearthed unpaid invoices that were critical for his cash flow, and meticulously restructured his calendar. She didn't just organize, she analyzed, sending him a concise report outlining the financial bottlenecks and opportunities she'd spotted. When she video called him to walk him through the new systems, his face was a picture of stunned disbelief. It's beautiful," he whispered, scrolling through the orderly inbox. "I can actually see again. I can think." He paid her invoice immediately and added a substantial bonus. "You're a wizard, Margaret," he wrote. "A absolute wizard." Word began to spread. It wasn't a loud, dramatic marketing campaign. It was a quiet rumble of gratitude to the local business community. A florist who needed help managing wedding contracts. A therapist who required a discreet and empathetic handler for patient scheduling. Margaret's client list grew, one satisfied customer at a time. She was no longer just an assistant. She was a strategic partner, a calm port in the storm of entrepreneurial stress. Meanwhile, back at Sterling and Gray, the cracks were beginning to show. In the break room, Leah, the junior architect, was venting to a colleague. "Did you hear? Chloe streamlined the vendor payments so badly, we almost lost our best concrete supplier. No one caught it because the approval email went some new generic inbox no one checks." Her colleague nodded grimly, stirring her coffee. "It's a mess. No one knows how Margaret kept it all straight in her head. I heard she started her own company. Albright Assistants. Sarah, over at Flux Studio, hired her last week. Says she saved them from a massive legal headache by catching a clause everyone else missed. Calls her a miracle worker." The gossip was a quiet, persistent hum under the sterile surface of the office. The new, streamlined operation was proving to be full of glitches and cold, impersonal emails that alienated longtime associates. Chloe was technically efficient, but created chaos through her lack of personal connection and historical knowledge. Around the water cooler and in hushed tones over lunch, people started to whisper Margaret's name like a secret, a ghost that hauntingly reminded them of how things used to be, and how good it felt to be truly seen and supported. The heart of Sterling and Gray had been removed, and the body was beginning to falter. The offer, success, as Margaret was discovering, was a quiet, simmering pot of satisfaction. It didn't boil over with loud boasts. Instead, it filled a room with a warmth that permeated everything. Her home office, once a spare room used for storage, was now a command center of organized tranquility. The walls, once bare, now held a tasteful dry erase board mapping out client timelines and a small shelf for her growing collection of thank you notes. The frantic energy of those first weeks had solidified into a smooth, confident rhythm. She was no longer surviving. She was building an empire, one satisfied client at a time. On this particular afternoon, the sun was casting long, golden rays across her desk. Margaret was in a state of focused flow, effortlessly managing the needs of 3 clients simultaneously. For a local bakery, she was negotiating a better rate with a flour supplier via email. For a freelance photographer, she was meticulously coding expenses into a cloud-based accounting system. And on a speakerphone call, her voice was calm and reassuring as she walked a nervous young novelist through the process of formatting his manuscript for submission to literary agents. "Don't worry about the header formatting, Mark," she was saying, her eyes scanning the document on her screen. "I can standardize all that for you. Your job is to keep writing the next chapter. Let me handle the rest." The gratitude in his voice was its own form of currency. It was in the middle of this harmonious symphony that her personal phone rang. The number on the screen was not one of her clients. It was a number etched into her memory from 28 years of dialing it herself. The main line for Sterling and Gray. Her first instinct was a cold jolt of aversion, a primal urge to let it go to voicemail and never listen to message. The past could stay in the past, where it belonged. But a newer, steelier part of her, the part that had built Albright Assistants from the ashes of her old life, was curious. This wasn't a call she was expected to take. This was an intrusion. And intrusions, in her experience, often revealed weakness. She excused herself from Mark, promising to call him back, and took a steadying breath before answering. She did not use the cheerful, familiar greeting of her old life. She used the title of her new one. Albright Assistants, Margaret speaking. There was a long, telling silence on the other end. It was the silence of someone who had rehearsed a speech but forgotten the first line upon hearing the voice of their audience. Then, a voice she'd know anywhere, now stripped of its CEO bravado, cracked with a stress that was palpably raw. Margaret, it's Brendan. Brendan Sterling. The silence that followed was one Margaret controlled completely. She offered no pleasantries, no helpful prompt. She simply waited, allowing the sheer, awkward weight of the moment to press down on him. She could almost hear him sweating through the phone. I don't even know how to say this, he finally stammered, the words tumbling out in a nervous, uncharacteristic flood. We need your help. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. She remained silent. A tactic she had learned was far more powerful than any question. Brendan plunged on, the dam of his pride clearly broken. It's the Henderson account. Our biggest client. The one you managed for so long. He paused, as if the memory of her tenure was a physical pain. It's a disaster, an unmitigated disaster. The transition after you left, things were missed. Critical deadlines, specific clauses in the contract addendums, things that weren't in the main file, but that you always kept track of. Chloe, she doesn't have that history. She didn't know to look for them. Margaret's mind, the very institutional memory he was describing, instantly accessed the Henderson file. She could see it clearly. The complex phasing of the project, the particular sensitivities of Old Man Henderson himself, the specific vendor approvals that were required at each stage. It was a tapestry of details, and it seemed they had pulled the wrong thread. Henderson is livid, Brendan continued, his voice tightening with panic. He's claiming breach of contract. He's threatening to walk and take the entire $15 million project to Foster and Sons. Margaret, it would cripple us. It would mean layoffs. It could sink the firm. $15 million. The number hung in the air between them, a monument to their catastrophic error. The Henderson project had been her masterpiece, a relationship she had nurtured with a blend of fierce professionalism and genuine personal care for over a decade. We need you to come back, Brendan blurted out, the desperation naked in his tone. As a consultant, just for 2 weeks. To fix this, to smooth things over with Henderson, to get us back on track. We'll pay you. Triple your old salary for that period. Name your price, Margaret. Please, just name your price. The offer landed on her like a physical thing, glittering and poisonous. Triple her salary. The vindication of it was intensely sweet. The chance to walk back into that sleek, glass-walled office not as a cast-off, but as a savior. To see the looks on their faces. Brendan's shame, Chloe's humiliation. It was a fantasy of revenge served on a silver platter. But as the initial, visceral thrill subsided, cooler thoughts rushed in. She thought of Leah and the other junior architects and designers. Good, hard-working people who had nothing to do with Brendan's poor judgment. Their jobs, their mortgages, their futures were now dangling by a thread because of this incompetence. This wasn't just about Brendan's hubris. Real, innocent lives were at stake. She also thought of her own company, of Leo and the baker and the novelist, of the freedom she had fought so hard to win. Going back, even for 2 weeks, even as a consultant, felt like a step backward into a cage, no matter how gilded. She looked around her sunlit office, at the evidence of her own success, built on her own terms. The silence on the phone stretched, becoming a void into which Brendan's fears poured. Margaret? Are you there? She had learned that in negotiation, the one who speaks first loses. She let his anxiety simmer for a moment longer. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the voice of a former employee. It was a calm, measured tone of a principal. I'll need to review my current commitments, she said, her words deliberate and devoid of emotion. "I'll call you back with my decision within the hour." She ended the call without waiting for a response. She placed the phone gently on the desk. The quiet of the room was no longer peaceful. It was charged with the electricity of a crossroads. It was the ultimate test of the person she had become. A chance for revenge, a chance for mercy, or a chance to do something so audaciously different it would redefine the game entirely. Brendan Sterling had just thrown a lifeline to the very person he'd pushed overboard, and he was waiting to see if she would pull him to safety or watch him drown. Margaret Albright allowed a small, inscrutable smile to touch her lips. They were waiting for her decision. They had no idea she was about to change the rules completely. The meeting, the air in the Sterling and Gray conference room was thick with a potent mixture of desperation and stale anxiety. It was the same room where, months before, Margaret's world had been dismantled with clinical precision. Today, however, the energy was profoundly different. She was no longer a supplicant. She was a variable in their equation for survival. Margaret entered not with the hesitant step of a former employee, but with the calm, assured stride of a visiting executive. She had chosen her attire with care, a tailored navy blue dress that spoke of authority, not assimilation. She carried a slim tablet, a world away from the steno pad she'd been instructed to bring on her last visit. She was a different woman, and her mere presence in the doorway was a silent proclamation of that fact. Brendan Sterling looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He offered a weak, strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. Chloe sat beside him, her earlier, fashionable arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by a pale, nervous tension. She looked young and utterly out of her depth. The other partners, men Margaret had known for decades, fidgeted with their pens and avoided looking directly at her. "Margaret, thank you for coming," Brendan began, his voice hollow, the words formality that rang utterly false in the tense silence. Margaret gave a single, curt nod as she took the seat she chose for herself, not the one they had obviously intended for her. She placed her tablet on the gleaming table. "Let's discuss the Henderson situation," she said, bypassing all preamble. Her tone was that of a doctor addressing a concerning diagnosis, professional and detached. Brendan and Chloe launched into a stumbling, overlapping explanation of catastrophe. They spoke of missed deadlines due to a calendaring error, of a critical contract addendum that had been misfiled and forgotten, of terse emails from Henderson's lawyers, and the final, devastating phone call threatening to pull the entire $15 million project. With every fumbled detail, every admission of an oversight that Margaret would have never made, the gravity of their failure deepened. They weren't just describing a problem. They were building the case for their own incompetence. When they finally fell silent, the room seemed to exhale a collective breath of shame. Brendan looked down at his hands. Chloe's shoulders were hunched. Margaret allowed the silence to hang for a moment, ensuring the full weight of their mismanagement settled upon them. Then she spoke, her voice clear, firm, and utterly transformative. "I have a proposal." Brendan's head snapped up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. "Yes, anything. We're ready. We have a consulting contract right here." He gestured to a document in front of Susan from HR. "I'm not here to consult for you," Margaret stated, her words dropping into the room with the finality of a judge's gavel. Every face in the room froze in confusion. "I'm here to offer you a solution. My firm, Albright Assistants, specializes in crisis management and high-level administrative support for precisely this kind of complex account oversight. We can take over the Henderson account management immediately and get it back on track." She didn't wait for their brains to process the paradigm shift. She tapped her tablet and swiped. A document appeared on the large wall-mounted screen via a wireless connection. It was a flawless, detailed proposal, complete with the Albright Assistants logo. "These are our terms," she continued, her voice cool and professional. "A 1-year retainer for our services, at a rate that reflects our specialized expertise and the urgent, salvage nature of this intervention. My team will be embedded here to manage the account, reporting directly to me. We will require full access and autonomy to rectify the situation with the Henderson Group." Brendan's face cycled through a spectacular range of emotions: shock, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, a flush of anger. "You're your team?" he sputtered, the word seeming foreign on his tongue. "You want us to hire your company? To report to you?" "It's the only way to save the account," Margaret stated, her gaze unwavering. "You terminated my employment because you believe my role was obsolete. This proposal proves its value in terms I assume you can understand: financial sustainability. The choice is entirely yours. You can hire my firm and save your company, or you can let your pride finish what your poor judgment started. I have other clients waiting for my attention." The ultimatum hung in the air, brutal and brilliant. She had taken their language, efficiency, streamlining bottom-line value, and given it back to them as a mirror, forcing them to stare at their own reflection. The other partners looked at each other, then at Brendan, their faces grim. They were businessmen. They saw the numbers. They saw the lifeline. They gave him almost imperceptible nods. Brendan Sterling looked at the woman across the table. He did not see a secretary. He saw a CEO. He saw the architect of his salvation and the instrument of his profound humiliation. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He had run out of options. He picked up the pen. It was the same cheap plastic ballpoint from months ago. His hand trembled slightly as he scrawled his signature on the line that designated Albright Assistants as a vendor, a partner, a savior. "Excellent," Margaret said, a gracious, professional smile touching her lips. It never reached her eyes. "My lead associate will be in first thing tomorrow to begin the onboarding process and audit the current workflow. She's excellent. You'll find her very efficient." She stood, collected her tablet, and shook Brendan's limp hand. As she turned to leave, she passed her old desk. Chloe was not sitting there. She was standing beside it, placing the few personal items from her own briefcase into a cardboard box. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Margaret saw no gloating in the older woman's gaze, no victory. There was only a quiet, unshakable certainty. Margaret didn't pause. She simply walked, her head high, out of the conference room, through the familiar aisles of cubicles where every eye was upon her, and out into the bright, open sunlight of her future. She didn't get revenge. She had achieved something far more powerful. She had not just won. She had changed the entire game, redefining her value on her own terms and securing the future of the people who had shown her loyalty. She had turned her termination into her triumph. If this story of quiet strength and stunning resilience inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Your value isn't defined by your title, but by your character and your courage to build your own table when others tell you don't belong. Subscribe for more powerful stories of everyday people achieving extraordinary turnarounds. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.